lies. That is the debate. What is the crux of my presentation? The crux is this: that Kudmun Sen has written a book, and in that book he has talked about the similarity between Buddhist position and Wittgensteinian position about universals. And in Buddhist, as you all know, that it is Apohavada, that is nominalistic position, and according to Gudmund Sen, Wittgenstein's position is also a nominalist position, and therefore there is a clear-cut similarity between Buddhist and that of Wittgenstein. This is my Puru Paksha, which I am going to reject, and I am going to establish that Gudmund Sen's point of view is naive, and it has to be criticized. It has to be develop further. So this is basically the crux. I am basically researching in the area of Gudmund Sen's approach to the similarity between Buddhist position and Wittgensteinian position about the meaning and existence of universals. Now in Wittgenstein, of course, that will not be universals, but it will be like to some extent more in the context of family resemblance, and sometimes he talks about universals also. But here basically the concept of family resemblance is taken to mean that the concept of universals as it stands in negation of universals as it stands in Buddhism. So this is the background. This is the crux basically. Now in this I have shown here that this is what Gudmund Sen maintains in his book Wittgenstein and Buddhism, that there is a clear-cut kind of similarity between Wittgensteinian position about meaning and existence of universals and the position of Mahayana Buddhists about existence of universals, which is regarded as Apohavada. So this is Gudmund Sen quoted here, and this is Puru Paksha of my presentation. This has to be seen clearly because this is the premise which I am going to reject. So this has to be understood. That is what I am arguing according to Gudmund Sen is that since both had rejected realism about universals, both means Buddhist and Wittgenstein had rejected realism about universals, and this surely is not dispute about later Wittgenstein. They were led to a similar view about how words relate to each other. The realism which was rejected had evolved the idea that a word like blue corresponds to or refers to a single something which constitutes its essential meaning, muddy perhaps in actual application of the word, since this had gone from where can words derive their meaning. So this basically is the position, and suppose that this is the last slide of Puru Paksha, which talks about this, that according to Buddhist logicians, the word derives its meaning by carving out place of itself. This is what Gudmund Sen says about Buddhist position about meaning, and this is what he says, that to define blue, there is no single thing one can point out as that to which the word refers. Words are related in a language game quite naturally and harmoniously. So that means that we need to see that how Buddhist position and Wittgensteinian position about meaning of words and sentences are very in close similar perspective. So this basically is the one which leads to, it does not seem to me, this is what Gudmund Sen says, I suppose. This again, this little more about this does not mean that there is any important logical difference between the two approaches. This line is something which I am rejecting, that it does not seem to me that there is any important logical difference between the two approaches, the approach of Wittgenstein and that of Buddhism. And in avoiding a referential norm of meaning, they are both in agreement with Nagarjuna's insistence that the meaning of words, that is names, is derived from the relationship which one word has with other words, not from an intrinsic relationship with an existent objective reference. This is the thing, that according to Gudmund Sen, this is the one thing, according to Gudmund Sen, Nagarjuna's point of view, which brings Buddhism closer to Wittgenstein so far as the position of the status of universals concerned. Now questioning, it is surprising, this what I am questioning, it is surprising that above remarks of Gudmund Sen has gone unnoticed among Wittgensteinians on the one hand and Buddhist philosophers on the other. In his zeal to establish his own conclusions about the similarities between Wittgensteinian and Buddhist on meaning and universals, Gudmund Sen has undermined the differences and misinterpreted their philosophy of language. So this is my position, that I am going to establish this position. This is the conclusion of my presentation basically, which I am going to support with the premises after this. So entire my presentation basically is nothing but construction of my premises to establish this conclusion, that is to debunk Gudmund Sen, who shows that there is a kind of similarity between Buddhist position and that of Wittgenstein position about meaning and existence of universals. So the purpose is this only. I would like to argue, as I said, and we should not risk getting contended with the surface similarities among the positions of Wittgenstein on one hand and Buddhist on the other hand, so far as the meaning of universals are concerned. Because Wittgenstein had talked about surface grammar and depth grammar. So I suppose that in my presentation, in my paper, that the notion of depth grammar is something which Gudmund Sen has altogether been noticed. So universals defined, as we all know, universals are defined as in Nyaya, Nityam, Ekam and Anekangatam. So there are two kinds of universals, higher and lower, and the basic point is that although it is eternal and belongs to many, but it does not inherit in them. That means that this is the kinds, and then further you can say that about the universals, the common characteristics of certain individuals or entities belong to a particular class. Yes, but the universals are a class concept. They are different because a class could have a subclass, but universals they don't have basically subclass. And there are three theories. We all know that realist, that is Nyaya Vaisesika, and conceptualist, that is Jainism and Vedanta, and then we have Buddhist, which is called Apovada. And this Buddhist position basically, the nominalist position called Apovada, which holds that the universals are only names. There are no universals. So in the existence, when we say that they are universals, basically they are not universals. So and they do not really exist according to Buddhists. For example, a cow means not non-cow. So it's a mode of saying about something, mode of talking about something in negation of that thing. So according to Apovada, there are no universals, and universals are only names with negative connotations. And Buddhist position about universals is unique in Indian philosophy, and as we are noticed. So, and I have brought here Srinivas's position in Buddhist logic, in his book Buddhist Logic, about Buddhist position about universals. And he says that in Indian theories of universals can be divided into two groups, not three groups. As I said that he divides only realists and idealists, and he says that realists assume that every universal exists in the external world as a separate unit invariably connected with all the individuals in which it is present, and idealists are against this. And in the idealist, he says that this conceptualist could be subsumed, and as well as nominalists maintain that only individuals are real. The universals are mere images, mere concepts, and mere names. So this division is pretty significant in my presentation, because this is something which is quite debatable as to what are the theories of universals, and universals could be classified in how many kinds of theories, and is there any clear-cut delineation of theories so far as the concepts are concerned. Then Gudmundsson, about what he says about this. Here I would like to present in to limit my presentation and about what Gudmundsson says. I am not going into detail about other theories of universals, because it will be longish kind of things. And the Buddhist theory of universals is divided into two periods: the first period and later period, and the difference between sanskara and vikalpa. I am running short of time, I think. Then Sherbatsky says that it is a nominalism basically, but of the sort which cannot be distinguished from the conceptualism, because he makes the difference. Sherbatsky doesn't make difference between nominalist conceptualists and idealist positions. And then this basically background and differences in the Buddhist tradition about the notion of Abhobhag. Let us now turn to Wittgenstein. Now, Wittgenstein, as we all know that in the early Wittgenstein picture theory, where we all propositions to be possible state of affairs, and he talks about general form here, not later Wittgenstein. Basically, later Wittgenstein we find the concept of resemblance, and this is basically philosophy, grammar, and blue book, where he talks about something in philosophy, grammar. He talks about that the something which is common to all forms. Then grammatical forms. There is something which is common to the grammatical form. Then Wittgenstein basically condemns this in blue book, and then I have got Hans John Locke to reflect on this point, which I am not going to elaborate more about this, because I think this is significant, but due to lack of time, I think this could be skipped. Then the search for pure in Wittgenstein is hallmark of essentialism, which requires the theory of universals. Basically, this essentialist, as later Wittgenstein is anti-essentialist, so he is basically to be seen in that context. Now, this is again, for example, general term leaf, not to be taken as a kind of generic term, because leaves are of different kinds. I mean, like the palm leaf is different from neem leaf. So, what is common among various kinds of leaves? So there is nothing common in that. So this is the kind of things that John Locke talks about, that there is no kind of general kind of form which later Wittgenstein takes about. So this is all not that very controversial, because this supports that later Wittgenstein is against that what he talked about in picture theory and early Wittgenstein about so far as the position of universals are concerned. And so this roughly means that we are looking at the words as though they all were proper names, and we then confuse the bearer of a name with the meaning of the name. So this is the problem, the crux of the problem in early Wittgenstein, where you cannot make the distinction between the bearer of the name and the meaning of the name, because the word basically denotes the object, and the object stands for the meaning of the word. So this is something which to be seen, to be rejected in Wittgenstein. And this all we know that what PI 66 talks about universals, and because he says that both there are different kinds of games, and there is nothing common to all games, and then Wittgenstein wants that don't think but look. And then this is the conclusion of PI 66, which we are basically aware about, that a complicated network of similarities overlapping and crisscrossing. So in place of there is a clear-cut kind of similarity, there is a kind of family resemblance, and in family, like you have different kinds of, if you have twins, for example, or you have kind of entire family, 5-6 children, they have a kind of crisscrossing resemblance, not the identity or not the similarity in their faces. So again he talks about this is PI67, which but then what is significant is this thinker, that is what I have taken. I don't know how to pronounce it, Gordian, something like that. I don't know, because I think he's German. This Gordian. So he talks about something about this is very relevant. So he talks about feminism, Wittgenstein talks about feminism, and he says that let us note that there is no hard and fast line dividing the broader cases of reference where the name chair say that apply to many chairs. The same kind of the leaves, and then one final word. And there is no hard and fast dividing line between cases where an object or phenomenon could be called a poor X and cases where it would be not called X at all. So how to define a poor, like how to define a table, how to define a chair, how to define a leaf. There is no clear-cut one common feature which would be denoted to, which would be taken the meaning of the particular word, but which has a kind of series of resemblances, feminism, and Wittgenstein rejected universals and rejecting the craving for universals as, that for example, in praying and expecting and numbers, Jesus, reading. There are different types of different series of activities. So that is why there are Wittgenstein and universals. This basically. Wittgenstein's discussion on universal, that is the craving for generality, is not in the direct reference to nominalist concepts. This has to be taken in view. And then Wembro is a thinker who talks about much in this area. He talks about that positions of nominalists and realists and Wittgenstein has a different kind of context, as from which could be taken as a nominalist as presumed by Gudmundsson. So Wembro says that nominalist says that the games have nothing in common, that they are called games. So I'm not going to details here, but only want to emphasize that Wittgenstein does deny that at one hand, the same time, nominalists claim that the games have something in common except that they are called games, and realists claim that they have something in common other than they are. So what is the basic point is that Wittgenstein is neither realist nor nominalist. This has to be taken into mind, and basically this is the thesis which is not accepted by Gudmundsson or omitted by Gudmundsson. That is why he could not see the differences between Buddhist position and that of Wittgenstein position so far as the meaning and existence of universals are concerned. And this is the kind of nearing to conclusion. And Wittgenstein is easily confused with the nominalist because he denies what the realist asserts, that games have something in common other than they are games. When we see that Wittgenstein is not a nominalist, we may easily confuse him with the realist because he denies what the nominalist asserts, that games have nothing in common except that they are called games. But we can now see that Wittgenstein is neither a realist nor a nominalist. This is my conclusion basically. And so in this, I'm in this conclusion with Wembro also, and he is having similar kind of opinion, but I differ from Wembro a bit, but there's no time to go in that detail, because this kind of thesis which is longest. And this actually is not one aspect of the story of digging out the differences between positions of Wittgenstein and Buddhism on universals. Other side is could be construed, and that of like Berkeley and Buddhism. So I'm not again coming into this Servatsky, and I feel that Servatsky has something very important to contribute to this debate between myself and that of Wembro, but that is also to be searched later on. Thus, the differences between Buddhist and Wittgenstein position universals need to be appreciated while putting them together under the umbrella concept of nominalist, as otherwise in itself would debunk their nominalist presupposition of not putting things together on the basis of imaginary common features or properties. And this basically is the end. Thank you.
You took 20 minutes, exactly 20 minutes. Thank you so much. Although you have sufficient time for discussion. Now I invite Dr. Fela to comment on this paper. Dr. Fela, I'm giving you 7 minutes.
the arguments are well structured, so I won't comment much. It's about the paper, but what I think we can learn from the paper is that in the case of Wittgenstein, it has happened a lot. I think that the mistakes made by Gudmundsson is also that the rejection of Wittgenstein's, the rejection of realism on universals by Wittgenstein's results in the support of the opposite or the rival theories. That is the mistakes made by Gudmundsson. So it has happened a lot in Wittgenstein regarding contextualism, regarding relativism. So the rejection of one theory does not necessarily result in the acceptance of the rival theories. That is what we have to learn from this paper also, I think, which Professor Pandey has pointed out. And I have one question. The question I have is how much or what effect does it have on the book, on the whole of the book? So you reject his argument on this part. So what effect does it have on the whole thesis of the book? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now, Professor Pandey, would you like to take the questions? I mean, should I open the floor for discussion and then you will come in from?
Actually, the question is very significant, Chairman.
Okay, fine.
So I'll take only a couple of minutes to reply. And
take your time.
Thank you.
Take your
So
time.
actually, I could see that watch from that side. It was showing as if I have completed 25 minutes. So I rushed towards
you started at 2:02 and you finished at 2:22. So it was simply 20
so
minutes.
I was in kind of illusion that the time is running much. I should have been slower, not running much faster in the end. But I thought that not to take more time because chairman is here, so that I should not take more time. So the thing is that the question is thank you very much for your comment, official comment, and I would like to say only a few words about that is the similarity between universals and universals of Wittgenstein and that of Buddhist position and Buddhist position of universals basically comprises only one section, small section of the book. That is basically Gudmundsson's book. That is basically one only small section, and the book is not about metaphysics much because this section deals with metaphysics of Buddhism basically and this theory of philosophical language. Basically, the book is about ethics. So there is much similarity between Wittgenstein position on ethics and that of Buddhist position on ethics in that book. So Gudmundsson must talks about the similarities between Wittgenstein and that of Buddhism from the ethical perspective, not much from the metaphysical perspective. So this section does not much affect the entire thesis of the book, only a small portion.
Thank you so much. Now the floor is open for discussion. So you can ask your questions one by one. And would you like to answer each question separately or taking all questions together and answering later on? No, it's up to you. It's whatever is one by one is so. Yes, please, ma'am, please, sir, and then you. Yeah. So yeah, please. No, first. Okay, you are the first one.
Thank you, Pandeyji, for a very nice presentation. Thank you for taking Gudmundsson's very interesting book on Wittgenstein and Buddhism. Of course, in that book, as you know, that he has been comparing Wittgenstein on various grounds, and one aspect you have taken, that is universals. But we can understand your problem that it is very difficult to see the concept of universal in Wittgenstein's thing. But what is disturbing me is towards the end of your paper, you said that Wittgenstein is not a realist. That is really very difficult to digest, because especially if you see from the tractative standpoint, of course, as well as philosophical Wittgenstein, you can see that he could be termed as a realist. For example, the entire picture theory of meaning as a reference to this realistic framework. When you say that there exists a corresponding relation between language and reality, it reflects that he is one who is supporting the realistic approach, which is very important. So on what grounds you would reject that? Then where do you place Wittgenstein? This is my problem. You will reject him saying that he is neither a nominalist nor a realist. Then I mean, it's very difficult to understand your position with regard to Wittgenstein.
It is really very complex position. As in the beginning of I said, in the beginning of my presentation, that is very complex position. And I said that he is neither realist, nor novelist, nor idealist, nor unist. Because of the remarks Wittgenstein has provided in his later work. And as we all know that we have various interpretations of Wittgenstein, so far as early Wittgenstein is concerned, or later Wittgenstein, and even there are books that idealism of Wittgenstein, in early Wittgenstein, and idealism of Wittgenstein, later Wittgenstein. But that is a kind of journal way I am talking about. But so far as my topic is concerned, in much the context of my topic, that is about Wittgenstein position about universals. This is what is emerging out, that Wittgenstein could not be clubbed with any kind of theories about universals, whether it is nominalism or conceptualism or idealism. And I have tried to show that the classification of theories about universals also is debatable, not only in case of Wittgenstein but also in other contexts also, like say Bansky also has a different kind of clubbing of theories about universals, and he clubs all theories about universals to two. Some people are talking about three. But so far as Wittgenstein is concerned, it is really a question of further research as to where could it be clubbed, or is there any need of clubbing at all? That is also debatable in context of Wittgenstein. That is clubbing is very important. Is clubbing is more important than Wittgensteinian position about universals? That is a basic question. I suppose that clubbing is not that important. Clubbing of Wittgenstein's position is not that important. As important is Wittgenstein's point of understanding Wittgenstein's point of view about universals, and that could be very much as Bambro talks about, where he is talking about that this Wittgenstein could not be clubbed. All right. But he has talked about certain kind of leaning of Wittgenstein towards realist interpretation of Wittgenstein position, so far as later Wittgenstein is concerned. But if you put Wittgenstein's position, later Wittgenstein as a realist, then we have too much difficulty in explaining PI 66 and 67. Where he is rejecting a direct kind of referent point which realists talk about in case of realists. So there is one-to-one relation between word and the object outside. And this position is not acceptable to PI 66 and 67. So we have to be very careful about interpreting Wittgenstein so far as universals are concerned, because we are unable to put him in a particular kind of club. Because we have to put him in nominalist position, because nominalist position has its own reservations. So Wittgenstein is not very much supporting Buddhist position, of course in a different way, because he is not talking about universals, concept of universals, and Samonia itself is kind of debatable as to whether they are in what sense they are universals in the Western sense, and universals, that is Samonia, in the Indian context. How they could be subsumed together for clear-cut single drishti, how could we see them as having the same problem, that's the problem of universals. So So this is also one debate. That is, I did your question very significant. That this could be the basis of future researches.
Thank you. Next question, Professor Vinakshi here.
Yes. Thank you, Professor Pandey. I completely agree with your paper. The thing is that, I have two questions. That Wittgenstein not being a nominalist is what he said explicitly. I just found on PI 383. And he says that the nominalists make a mistake. What they do is that they group all, they match a particular word with an arbitrary collection. And as a result, they are also falling in the Augustinian model. He just says that, I just found it out that nominalists make the mistake of interpreting all words as names. And so, of not really describing their use. So to speak, giving a paper draft on such description. So they are also falling on a particular model of Augustine. So, and another thing, I would ask that the Buddhist Apohabhada, would you think that Buddhist Apohabhada actually equates with this Western nominalism? You didn't speak about it.
I did speak about that. And your first point, I put you that I had read this, but I forgot this first point. And that's a very significant point in support of the conclusion that he doesn't support.
Yeah, he says explicitly.
Yeah, explicitly he says that. So thank you. I'll take it. Note that and include that also. Though I had read, that had fake memory that I had read somewhere. But you gave the reference to that. About this, yes, I have not gone into that detail of bringing this kind of debate, which I basically had a little bit about how to bring that universals in Western sense and Samonia in Indian context. I had not gone into much about Apohabhada, Buddhist Apohabhada, and the novelist of Berkeley kind. So, but there are works, I think Sevatsky also talks about, and there are some other Buddhists who are talking about this thing. But yes, I have to do that. And I'll learn more about this.
I just want to say that I don't think that the nominalism in way Wittgenstein is presenting it, Buddhists are also not nominalists in that sense. Their Apohabhada is not nominalism in this sense that making a this kind of name object as not one name and one object, but one name and a lot of objects.
Yes.
Arbitrary kind of name.
Yes.
That is what nominalism is.
Yes.
I don't think Apohabhada would be like that.
Yeah, I accept your point. Well, there is need of research to show as to how could Buddhist position, that is Apohabhada, could be regarded as novelist. Whether it could be or not, but this has been general trend that people are accepting that Buddhist Apohabhada is novelist position, which has to be treated. There is time that we need to treat it, whether accept it or reject it, and if reject it, what are the arguments? I think this itself could be a good research point.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, next question.
Sir,
Yeah, please. Yeah.
thank you, sir, for such a wonderful speech. Sir, my question regarding the Apohabhada. Sir, Apohabhada rejects the idea of objective reference of the world. Sir, yes or no?
Yeah.
Yes. And also Apohabhada refutes the pluralistic conception of reality that accept the universal or real. My query is that if a word does not signify any real object, then what is its significance?
Yes. What is the significance? That is the real problem for Apohabhada. That is why they define in a certain way, which is not acceptable to analysis. Their Apohabhada is distinct. That is accepted like definition, and Buddhist Apohabhada is a distinct kind of unique philosophy.
So, due to time constraint, I think this should be the last question. Any other question if you have, you can talk to Professor Pandey all the time on WhatsApp or maybe while having a cup of tea. Now, thank you so much, Professor Pandey, for a wonderful presentation and for a wonderful conference that you have organized. Now, I invite Ms. Rumpa Chakrabarti
Yes.
to speak about. Please welcome.